It's the case that's baffled a community for almost a century. A mystery filled with more questions than answers. It's the tragic story of a prominent St. Louis attorney and well-known political figure and civil rights activist. The story of revered and forever celebrated Homer Garland Phillips. Hello and welcome back to my channel. Thanks as always for joining me in another episode of What Happened. Born in Sedalia, Missouri on April 1st, 1880, Homer G. Phillips was one of 10 children born to a Methodist minister and former slave. He was orphaned as an infant and raised by his aunt after both of his parents died. In 1907, his brother John died of typhoid fever at the age of 35. As he grew into adolescence and became old enough, he successfully petitioned the court on March of 1899 to have his name changed from John Wesley Phillips to Homer Garland Phillips. It is said that he decided to change his name to avoid confusion with two other Wesley Phillips who lived in Sedalia. He would eventually go on to graduate from George R. Smith College, a historically black college in Sedalia, and later from Howard University School of Law in 1903. His interest in law led him to Washington University, where he lived with renowned African-American poet Paul Laurence Dunbar. He briefly worked for the Department of Justice before moving back to Sedalia in 1904 to start his law career. In 1908, he taught civics at the Negro Teachers Institute, also known as Lincoln Hubbard School in Sedalia. The institute was opened in June 1907 by Professor and Principal C.C. Hubbard to help colored teachers pursue advancement in instruction. After working as a successful attorney in Sedalia for many years, in 1911, he moved to St. Louis, Missouri to establish himself and soon opened his own law practice. A year later, on June 5, 1912, he married Ida Pearl Alexander, an actress and noted soprano, at the St. Paul African Methodist Episcopal Church. He became active in politics and was a relentless crusader for civil rights causes. In 1916, he led the fight against the segregation ordinance that was passed in St. Louis, Missouri. The ordinance prevented blacks from moving into neighborhoods where 75% or more of the population was white. He filed an injunction which was denied to prevent the special election from happening. And when the ordinance passed, Phillips stated that they had been double-crossed by Republican leaders who did not deliver the votes needed to defeat the measure. He believed that political malfeasance was the cause and that political corruption led to the passing of the ordinance. With the assistance of the local branch of the NAACP, Phillips filed a motion requesting a temporary injunction to suspend the ordinance from taking effect. The injunction was granted on April 17, 1916, by U.S. District Judge David Dyer and was held until the pending Supreme Court case Buchanan v. Worley was decided. It was a case in which the city of Louisville had an ordinance that forbade any black persons to own or occupy any building in an area in which a greater number of white persons resided, and vice versa. When the decision finally came down in favor of Buchanan, the segregation ordinance in St. Louis was invalidated and made illegal, which meant that blacks were allowed to move into any community no matter how populous it was with white residents. He is also credited for helping to defend black soldiers who were court-martialed and several other black defendants who were charged in the 1917 East St. Louis, Illinois riots, in which upwards of 100 blacks and 9 whites lost their lives. It is considered one of the worst labor-related riots in U.S. history, which lasted from May to July, leaving the community of East St. Louis devastated and 6,000 African Americans displaced. When several black defendants were charged in connection with the riots, the NAACP strategically hired prominent white lawyers to lead the defense team. Phillips, who was considered the most outstanding attorney in St. Louis, was the leading black attorney on the team. At the conclusion of the trials, 10 blacks and only 4 whites were convicted of murder. Homer G. Phillips went on to defend and was successful in winning many high-profile cases throughout his career. Furthering his fight against civil injustice, in December 1919, at the Pythian Hall in St. Louis, Missouri, he helped to establish the Citizens Liberty League, a political organization created to advance the interests of African Americans in the Republican Party. It addressed the policies of segregation, exclusion, and discrimination in the state. He later went on to become one of the founding members of the St. Louis Negro Bar Association, which later became the Mound City Bar Association. It was established January 7, 1922, at a time when black lawyers were not allowed to join the all-white St. Louis Bar Association, and the objective was to advance the professional interests of black attorneys. In 1927, he was elected president of the National Bar Association. Later in 1915, Phillips led the fight to build a hospital in St. Louis that would serve the African American community, as well as train black doctors and nurses. A community of black doctors was formed to pressure local politicians to provide adequate medical facilities for black physicians and their patients. At the time, no private hospital would allow black doctors privileges to admit and treat patients. Phillips sought a resolution, so he requested the mayor at the time, Henry Kill, to assign black physicians to care for black patients at the city hospital. In seeking to accommodate Phillips' request, the mayor responded and acquired the derelict and vacant Barnes Hospital at Garrison and Lawton Avenues in the Mill Creek Valley area of St. Louis, Missouri. The hospital opened on January 1st, 1919, with 177 beds and 56 nurses. It was also one of 5 institutions in the United States at the time that would allow for black physicians to learn and practice. In the same year it opened, a nursing school was also established and was accredited in 1920. With the Great Migration and growing population of the 1920s, the hospital soon became inadequate and overcrowded, with the increasing need for medical care for African Americans. While intending to serve 177 patients, it served 100 more than that. 2 beds were often tied together at night to fit 3 or more patients, and with the growing African American community, the hospital was typically over its capacity and conditions within the building grew worse. After an investigation, it would soon be exposed by a black attorney, a doctor, and a St. Louis Star reporter who took pictures which showed the conditions to not be much better than that of the St. Louis Zoo. The hospital was a fire trap and was jeopardizing the safety and lives of patients and workers. Due to the failing equipment, a young doctor, Bernice A. Yancey, was electrocuted to death by a defective X-ray machine in 1934 at the age of 29. Throughout the 1920s, Homer G. Phillips also ran for several political office, but unfortunately was unsuccessful. It is also on record as him being an attorney in the divorce proceedings between Annie Malone, one of the first black millionaires, and her husband. A businesswoman, inventor, and philanthropist, Annie was also a major contributor to the St. Louis Colored Orphan Home in the Ville neighborhood of St. Louis, Missouri. In 1922, it was later changed to the Annie Malone Children and Family Services in her honor. With the city hospital in despair, Phillips led the push to create a new hospital and fought hard against state and government officials to secure a bond to cover the costs of the hospital. With his connections in the local Republican Party and his Citizens Committee, he fought to seek passage of an $87 million municipal bond, which ultimately passed in 1922. Of the approved amount, $1.2 million of the bond will be set aside for construction of new medical facilities for black citizens and medical professionals. After Mayor Henry Kill agreed to designate $1.2 million of the $87 million bond, the project was stalled by his successor, Mayor Victor Miller, who was later caught up in a scandal with the Ku Klux Klan. He was eventually forced to step away from his mayoral duties for a while, but by then had already managed to delay the construction for a decade, hating the idea of spending $1 million on a black hospital and of locating it in the Ville, a black neighborhood where doctors and lawyers lived alongside factory workers and housekeepers, and where black kids could grow up to see the possibilities for their future. Due to political interference, including Miller's obstruction, it would take years for the construction of the new hospital to begin. Unfortunately, Homer G. Phillips would not live to see the construction nor completion of the hospital. On the morning of June 18, 1931, at 7:45 a.m., Phillips left his home to go downtown to his office. He walked to the corner of Auburn and Delmar Boulevard in St. Louis, Missouri, to catch a streetcar. Along the way, he picked up a newspaper and, according to eyewitnesses, sat resting on a window ledge as he waited for the streetcar. It was also reported by the witnesses that two black men approached him and, after a brief exchange, struck him in the face and fired several shots into his body. The men fled, leaving Phillips dying on the sidewalk. Witnesses identified the two men as 19-year-old George McFarland and 18-year-old Augusta Brooks. They were both arrested and charged with Phillips's murder. Although the motive was unclear, the police suspected there was a dispute over the settlement of an estate worth $3,000 in which McFarland's mother was an heir. On February 18, 1932, George McFarland was found not guilty of the murder of Phillips. He claimed he had an alibi and testified he was at a grocery store at the time of the murder. 3 other witnesses corroborated his testimony. However, the police testified that when they arrested McFarland and interrogated him, he never mentioned going to the store the morning of the murder. The other defendant, Augusta Brooks, was later acquitted on August 10, 1932, after a 2.5-hour jury deliberation. There was only one witness in the trial that placed Brooks at the scene. The state's primary witness, who witnessed the actual shooting, could not be found to testify. Another witness did not testify because he was reportedly at home suffering from a nervous breakdown. The actual circumstances of the deaths were never determined, and to date, the case remains unsolved. As a civil rights activist, Phillips was greatly concerned with issues happening in the city's African American community. As one of the original owners of the St. Louis American, the purpose was to publish a weekly newspaper devoted to addressing African American concerns. The first issue was released in March of 1928 and continues to serve the community weekly as originally intended. Phillips was also a leader of the People's Finance Corporation, which was created to provide non-traditional financing to African Americans to purchase property when major white-controlled banks refused to lend to them. Homer G. Phillips Hospital was dedicated on February 22, 1937, with a parade and speeches from various leaders, and officially opened in May of 1937. The central building was finished between 1933 and 1935, while the 2 wings were finished between 1936 and 1937. It was renamed in 1942 from City Hospital No. 2 to Homer G. Phillips in his honor. After a 1955 order to desegregate city hospitals, Homer G. Phillips began admitting patients regardless of race, color, or religious beliefs. However, it remained primarily a black institution into the 1960s. On August 17, 1979, after almost 50 years of service, St. Louis abruptly closed all departments at Homer G. Phillips Hospital except for a small outpatient care clinic housed in an adjacent building. The community responded with protests, which continued for over a year. In February 1980, it was listed as a St. Louis landmark, and in 1982, listed on the National Registration of Historic Places for its significance in architecture, education, and to Black history. A few years later, in June 1985, then Mayor Vincent Shamel ordered the closure of all municipal hospital services, both at City Hospital and at the clinic at Homer G. Phillips. The Homer G. Phillips complex was totally vacated. In 1988, developer William Thomas began negotiations to convert the former Homer G. Phillips Hospital into a nursing home, but efforts failed with agreements to lease the property stalled. The property was abandoned until 1991. When the city reopened the adjacent clinic, the former nurses' building behind the main hospital also was reopened as an addition to Annie Malone Children's Home. However, the main building remained vacant. In 1998, the daughter of William Thomas, co-developer Sharon Thomas Robnett, renewed negotiations with the city to convert the building into low-income nursing home and apartments for the elderly. She signed a 99-year lease on the property. Renovations began on the main building in July of 2003. The 220-unit independent senior living facility was completed. Named Homer G. Phillips Dignity House, the facility offers amenities including a mini-mart, grocery store, beauty and barber salon, computer lab, and a fully equipped exercise facility. Homer Garland Phillips was not just an attorney, he was a highly respected figure in St. Louis. Despite the passage of time, his life and untimely death continue to intrigue historians, investigators, and community members alike nearly a century later. The story of Homer G. Phillips is one filled with intrigue, triumph, and tragedy. His life and mysterious death have left a lasting mark on St. Louis, immortalizing him forever. His trailblazing work and activism in the city of St. Louis was instrumental in changing the quality of care and life for African Americans then and now. The search for answers continues to this day. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of What Happened. As always, please like, comment, and share this video. For more stories and mysteries, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that you can always be the first to know what happened. Until next time.